Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we're taking a deep dive into a topic that hits close to home for many of us, the T-Mobile data breaches.
That's right.
We've received a lot of questions and concerns from you about this, so we've been digging deep into legal analyses, court documents, and even some lively discussions on Reddit, all to help you understand the ins and outs of these breaches.
Exactly.
And not just what happened, but what you can do about it, especially if you're looking for options beyond the typical class action lawsuit.
We know that data breaches are becoming way too common. And, well, T-Mobile's case, sadly, is a perfect example of how these things can go wrong and the real impact they have on people like you.
So, to set the stage, T-Mobile suffered a massive data breach back in 2021. It affected, get this, 76.6 million people.
Right.
That's a staggering number.
It really is.
It's just mind-boggling how much personal information was exposed.
And what's even more concerning is that this wasn't a one-time thing for T-Mobile.
Right.
This was actually their 5th data breach in just 4 years.
Yeah.
Raises some serious questions about their security practices.
Absolutely. Red flags galore.
Yeah.
And to make matters even worse, the information that was leaked, it wasn't just, minor details.
Yeah.
We're talking names, social security numbers, phone numbers, addresses, birth dates, the whole shebang.
All the sensitive stuff, the kind of information that can lead to some really serious problems if it falls into the wrong hands.
Right.
Think identity theft, financial fraud, even harassment.
Exactly. And we even saw in some Reddit threads, people were sharing their stories about experiencing identity theft or harassment directly after this breach happened. It's scary stuff.
It really is. And while companies often offer those class action settlements after breaches like this, we see time and time again people feeling like those settlements just aren't enough.
No, they don't cut it.
It's not real compensation for the damage that's been done.
Yeah. I mean, T-Mobile agreed to a $350 million settlement, which sounds like a lot.
It does.
But when you really break it down, some people only ended up receiving very small payouts. And honestly, money can't always fix the stress and that feeling of vulnerability that comes with having your personal information out there like that.
Absolutely. It's a violation. That's why it's crucial to remember that there are other options besides just joining a class action lawsuit. You might actually have grounds to file your own individual lawsuit, especially if you suffered significant harm directly because of the breach.
That's an important point. So let's say someone is thinking about going down that route. What are the legal grounds for data breach lawsuits like this? What are we talking about here?
Well, there are several legal avenues you can explore. Negligence is a big one. So if a company fails to take those reasonable steps to protect your data and that failure leads to a breach, well, you could have a case.
Oh.
Think of it like this. You leave your front door wide open and someone walks in and steals your stuff. You could be considered negligent in protecting your property.
That's a good way to put it. Makes sense. What other legal angles are there?
Breach of contract is another one. You see, many companies, they have these privacy policies that outline exactly how they're going to handle your data.
Right.
And if they violate those policies, boom, you might be able to sue for breach of contract. Then there's breach of warranty, which is kind of similar. It applies when a company promises a certain level of security, but doesn't actually deliver on that promise.
I see.
And finally, you might also have a case under state data privacy laws. And those, of course, vary from state to state.
So it sounds like there's a whole range of legal options depending on the specifics of the breach and the laws in your state.
Right.
But what about cases where companies say, hey, we were hacked, it's not our fault?
Yeah.
How does that play out?
That's when proving negligence or intent on the part of the company becomes absolutely critical. It might not always be easy to do, but it can really strengthen your case. If you can show that the company knew about vulnerabilities and just didn't bother to fix them, or that they didn't have adequate security measures in place, it's much harder for them to claim they were just victims of a sophisticated attack.
Right. And it makes you wonder, right, if some companies might be intentionally lax on security. I mean, we've all heard those conspiracy theories about companies selling data through these so-called fake breaches.
It's definitely a question that's on a lot of people's minds, especially given how often these breaches happen.
Yeah.
But let's be clear, if a company were ever caught intentionally orchestrating a data breach,
Right.
or knowingly allowing it to happen, the legal and financial consequences would be absolutely catastrophic.
I believe it.
We're talking criminal charges, massive fines, and the complete loss of public trust. It's just not a risk that most companies would be willing to take.
That's reassuring to hear.
Yeah.
But it still feels like something's not quite right here. If companies are supposedly so invested in security, why do these breaches keep happening?
Yep.
Is it all just about cutting corners and maximizing profits? What's the deal?
Well, it's probably a mix of factors. You have these constantly evolving cyber threats, human error, and yes, sometimes, let's face it, corporate negligence plays a role.
Right.
The Equifax data breach back in 2017,
Oh, yeah.
that's a prime example of how hidden information, potentially unethical behavior from CEOs, can really erode public trust.
That was a huge one. Nearly 150 million people affected. Can you remind us what exactly happened there?
Well, the CEO and other executives, they knew about a major security vulnerability for months.
Really?
But they chose not to disclose it, and they didn't take the steps to fix it. They were basically sitting on critical information that could have prevented the whole thing.
That's outrageous.
It is.
So they basically chose to protect their reputation and their bottom line instead of protecting their customers' data. Is that what we're saying?
It certainly seems that way.
Oh, wow.
And this kind of behavior, well, it really highlights the disconnect between what companies say about data security and what they actually do.
It's so frustrating. And it really makes you think, beyond the legal stuff, beyond the financial settlements,
Yeah.
what's the real cost of these breaches?
Right.
What about the impact on individuals like our listener? What are they going through?
That's such an important question, and unfortunately, it's one that often gets overlooked.
Right.
We tend to focus on the quantifiable damages, the dollars and cents,
Right.
but the intangible harm, that can be just as devastating.
Yeah.
Think about it. Having your personal information stolen, it's a deeply unsettling experience. It's a violation of your privacy, your sense of security, your control.
Absolutely. It's like having the rug pulled out from under you.
Oh.
Suddenly, you're not in control of your own information anymore.
Exactly. And that loss of control,
Yeah.
it can have a ripple effect, impacts your trust in institutions, your online behavior, even your mental well-being. It's not just about the money, it's about that feeling of vulnerability, the loss of trust, the potential for long-lasting anxiety.
Right. I remember reading a study from the Ponemon Institute, and they found that stress was the most commonly reported consequence of a data breach.
It's true.
It was affecting a majority of the victims.
A majority. That's a powerful statistic, and it really underlines how important it is to consider the emotional and psychological toll of these breaches. It's not just about the financial side of things. It's about feeling safe and secure in a world where our personal information is constantly at risk.
So, with that in mind, what can our listener do to regain that sense of control? How can they protect themselves in this increasingly data-driven world?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's one we're going to tackle head-on in the next part of our discussion.
Oh, awesome.
We'll be exploring some practical steps you can take to mitigate the risks, safeguard your data, and even advocate for stronger security measures from the companies that are holding your information. Welcome back. Before the break, we were really delving into the profound impact that these data breaches have on individuals. All those emotional, psychological aspects like the distress, the erosion of trust, that lingering feeling of vulnerability, it's heavy stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And knowing that there are some legal options out there beyond class action lawsuits is helpful. You mentioned negligence earlier. Can you kind of break down how that actually plays out in court? What does that look like?
Absolutely. There's a landmark case, Lurit v. P.F. Chang's.
Okay.
This was a big one. The Seventh Circuit Court, they decided that even just the theft of credit and debit card information, that alone was enough to give individuals the right to sue, even if fraudulent charges hadn't actually happened yet.
So just the potential for harm, the risk itself, was enough to establish grounds for a lawsuit.
Exactly. The court recognized that having your financial information out there compromised, it creates a very real, credible threat. And that alone justifies legal action.
That's interesting. Were there any cases where, maybe the outcome was different, maybe the court didn't quite see it that way?
Yeah, there have been. The specifics of each case really matter. There's another case, Inglo v. National Grocers.
Okay.
A Colorado court actually dismissed a lawsuit in this case because the plaintiff's credit card company, they detected the fraudulent charges right away, and they cleared them.
So because the person didn't actually experience any financial loss, the court said, no lawsuit.
That's how they ruled in this particular case. It really shows how important it is to prove concrete harm that's a direct result of the breach.
Got it. So it's not just about the breach itself. It's about being able to show that tangible negative impact.
Right.
You also mentioned state data privacy laws.
Yeah.
Can you give us a little more insight into how those work, specifically in the context of a data breach?
Sure. Let's look at Horizon Services, Inc. Data breach litigation.
Correct.
The Third Circuit Court, they decided that the plaintiffs actually had grounds to sue, even though their personal information wasn't technically misused.
Wait, really? How is that possible? I thought misuse of data was like the whole point of a lawsuit.
It's interesting, right? But in this case, the court said the company's violation of the Fair Credit Reporting Act, that's the FCRA,
Okay.
that was in itself a form of harm. The FCRA basically sets those regulations on how consumer credit information can be collected and used.
So even if the data wasn't stolen or used for malicious purposes,
Yeah,
the fact that the company messed up, they broke the FCRA, that was enough to justify taking legal action.
exactly. The court basically said the company's failure to follow those data protection laws, it put individuals at risk. And that's enough, regardless of whether that risk actually materialized or not.
Wow. So even if your data isn't like technically compromised, but a company screws up and doesn't comply with these data privacy laws,
Right.
you could still have grounds to sue.
You could.
It sounds like there are a lot of nuances in this area of the law.
A lot. Each case is unique, like you said. There's another one, Beck v. McDonald. In this one, the court dismissed the lawsuit because the plaintiffs couldn't actually prove that the stolen laptop that had their data on it was actually accessed, or that the theft was intentional.
So demonstrating intent, showing that a company or someone acted deliberately or, negligently, that plays a big role in these cases.
It's crucial. Proving negligence or intent, it really solidifies a case. It makes that connection clear between a company's actions, or in some cases inaction, and the harm that people suffered as a result.
This all kind of brings us to a question that a lot of people have been thinking about, and honestly, it's kind of unsettling. Could some companies actually be intentionally lax on security?
It's a scary thought.
Right. I mean, some people even believe that these companies might be selling data through these orchestrated breaches. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a question that generates a lot of debate, a lot of speculation, especially with, how frequently we see these breaches.
Yeah.
It's important to remember, though, that if a company were ever found to be complicit in a data breach, meaning they intentionally orchestrated it or knowingly allowed it to happen,
Right.
the consequences would be huge,
Yeah.
massive. We're talking about the potential for criminal charges,
Right.
the impact on their reputation, the loss of customer trust. It would be a PR nightmare.
Yeah.
All of that, it's just too much for most companies to even consider risking.
Right.
And legally speaking, proving that kind of intentional wrongdoing, it's extremely difficult.
I can imagine.
It is.
But the fact that these questions even come up, it really speaks to this growing sense of distrust between consumers and the companies that hold all their data.
Absolutely. There's a gap there, and it's widening. The Equifax data breach in 2017, that's a case that really fueled this fire of distrust.
Oh, yeah.
The CEO and other executives,
Right.
they knew about a major vulnerability for months, but they didn't say anything about it. They didn't take appropriate action.
Wow. So they basically knew about this security flaw that put millions of people at risk, and they just chose to ignore it.
Essentially, yes. And that lack of transparency, that lack of proactive action, it really damaged the public's trust, not just in Equifax, but in companies in general when it comes to data security.
It's incredibly frustrating because we're increasingly reliant on these companies to safeguard our data. Yet these breaches just keep happening.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if they're really prioritizing our security or if profit is the ultimate driving force behind their decisions.
It's a valid concern, and it all points to the need for stronger regulations, better enforcement of the laws we already have, and greater accountability from those corporations that are entrusted with all of our sensitive information.
Absolutely. So beyond understanding the legal landscape and the potential for corporate negligence, what can our listener actually do?
Yeah.
How can they protect themselves and regain that sense of control in this, digital age?
That's the crucial question, right? And it's the one we're going to dive deep into in the next part of our conversation. We're going to talk about those practical steps you can take to safeguard your data, how to mitigate the risks, and how to advocate for stronger security measures.
Welcome back, everyone. We've been dissecting these T-Mobile data breaches.
We have.
And I think we can all agree it's pretty disheartening to see the impact it has on people, their lives, their sense of security.
Yeah.
But before we get too doom and gloom here,
Right.
let's switch gears a bit.
Yeah, let's talk solutions.
Exactly. What can our listener actually do about this?
Yeah.
What are some practical steps they can take to protect themselves?
That's the empowering part of this conversation.
Right.
You're not powerless.
No.
There are definitely things you can do to mitigate your risk, safeguard your data.
Okay.
And it starts with being more aware of what you're doing online, making sure you're taking those basic security precautions.
So, like, what specifically? Give us the rundown.
All right. First and foremost, use strong, unique passwords for every single online account you have.
Okay.
I know it's tempting to just use the same one over and over again.
Well, yeah.
But that's really setting yourself up for trouble, because if one account gets compromised,
They all do.
they all do. A password manager can be a lifesaver for this.
Yes. Good point. I'm guilty of that myself sometimes.
It happens.
And what about all those phishing emails? They're getting sneakier and sneakier, it seems.
Absolutely. They're a major way that these hackers get into your accounts.
Yeah.
So you got to be really careful. Be cautious about any email that's asking for personal information or trying to get you to click on a suspicious link.
Right.
If your gut is telling you something's off,
It probably is.
it probably is. Trust your instincts. And don't forget to check your credit reports regularly for any unusual activity. Early detection is key when it comes to identity theft.
Right. Catch it before it snowballs out of control.
Oh.
It's kind of like being proactive about your health. It's better to address those small issues before they become big problems.
That's a great analogy.
Right.
And beyond those individual steps, it's really important to just be mindful of the information you're sharing online. Do you really need to create an account for every website you visit? Does that online store need your birthday, your home address, just so you can buy a pair of shoes? Think critically about what information is really necessary versus what's not.
It's about being intentional with your data,
Yes,
because companies are collecting so much information these days.
they are.
It's easy to just click accept without even thinking about it.
That's right. And that actually brings us to another important point. Understanding your rights. Do some research. Find out what your state's data breach laws are. What are companies required to do to protect your information? If they violate those laws, you might actually have some legal recourse.
That's good to know. And we'll be sure to include some resources in the show notes. Links to those state-specific laws, tips for safeguarding your data, even some organizations that advocate for stronger data security measures.
All great stuff. And remember, you're not alone in this. There are resources out there. By staying informed and taking these proactive steps, you can actually reclaim some of that sense of control over your digital life.
It's empowering to know that we're not just sitting ducks here. We can demand better from those companies that hold our data. We can take steps to protect ourselves.
Exactly. It's a two-way street. And
Yeah.
it's about creating a culture of awareness,
Yeah.
accountability. The more people understand their rights and the risks, the more pressure we can put on companies to actually prioritize security, to be transparent.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one key takeaway you want our listener to walk away with?
I think it boils down to this. In today's world, data breaches, they're a reality.
Yeah.
They happen,
Unfortunately.
but they don't have to define your online experience.
Right.
You have the power. By understanding the risks, knowing your rights, and taking those steps to protect yourself, you can navigate the digital world with more confidence, more peace of mind.
That's a great point. We've covered a lot of ground today, from how common these breaches are to the legal side of things to the emotional toll it takes on individuals.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It is. But I think the most important takeaway here is that we're not helpless. We have options, we have resources, and we have the power to make a difference. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. And remember, knowledge is power. Stay curious, stay safe, and keep diving deep.